The announcement never came. No press release. No formal statement from Buckingham Palace. No carefully worded explanation delivered through an official royal spokesperson. Nothing appeared in the court circular. Nothing was addressed at a briefing. Nothing was acknowledged at all. And yet, sometime in the early weeks of 2026, something extraordinary happened inside the walls of the British monarchy. Something that, once understood, reveals just how dramatically the balance of power within the royal family has shifted, and how far certain members are now willing to go to reshape what the institution will look like in the years ahead. 5 names connected to the Parker Bowles family quietly disappeared from official royal records. Not with fanfare, not with conflict that played out in public view, but with a precision and a silence that spoke louder than any announcement ever could. Those 5 names were Tom Parker Bowles, Laura Lopez, and 3 lesser-known relatives who had spent years operating in the comfortable shadow of Camilla's position as queen consort, individuals who had enjoyed palace access, quiet institutional courtesies, and the kind of soft, invisible infrastructure that surrounds a royal household without ever being formally named or publicly acknowledged. One day, that infrastructure was there. The next, it was gone. No explanation was offered to the public. No comment came from Camilla's office. The Parker Bowles family said nothing, and the palace itself remained perfectly, deliberately silent. But behind that silence was a decision. And behind that decision was a name that no one expected to find at the center of this story. Princess Anne. And behind her, quietly, privately, and with complete deniability, King Charles III himself. If you find yourself drawn to stories like this one, the hidden dynamics, the private decisions, and the moments that never make the official record, consider subscribing. Stories like this one don't wait, and neither should you. To understand what happened in early 2026, you cannot begin there. You have to go back to a marriage that divided the country, back to a woman who fought for 2 decades to be accepted, and back to a family that used that acceptance to build something quiet, something comfortable, and something that certain members of the royal family had been watching with growing unease for years. When Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles on April 9, 2005, the ceremony was civil, modest by royal standards, and deliberately understated. The public response was complicated. Many people had never forgiven Camilla for what they believed was her role in the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. The wounds were still raw. The memories of Diana were still vivid and painful for millions of people across Britain and around the world. But Charles was determined. He had loved Camilla for most of his adult life. And now, finally, she was his wife. What followed was a slow and careful process of normalization. Camilla was given a public role. She appeared at engagements. She stood beside Charles at state occasions. She performed the duties expected of her with quiet efficiency and, over time, a degree of genuine warmth that won over portions of the public who had once been deeply resistant to her presence. But Camilla did not come alone. She came with a family, and that family, over the years that followed the 2005 wedding, found itself gradually drawn into the outer edges of royal life in ways that were never loudly announced but were very much real. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, had built a successful career as a food writer and author. He was charming, well-connected, and comfortable in the circles that surrounded the monarchy. He attended events. He appeared at dinners. His name appeared on guest lists that mattered. His sister, Laura Lopez, followed a similar trajectory. She moved in the same elevated social world, present at royal gatherings, connected to the institutional life of the family her mother had married into. Neither Tom nor Laura held official royal roles. Neither carried titles. But they existed within a warm, supported proximity to the institution, benefiting from access, association, and the quiet courtesies that the palace extends to those it considers, informally, part of its world. And beyond Tom and Laura, there were others. 3 more distant relatives connected through the Parker Bowles family line, people whose names rarely appeared in headlines but who had nonetheless secured a kind of quiet belonging within the edges of royal life. Invitations, access, the small but significant privileges that come from being close to the crown without actually wearing it. For years, this arrangement existed without serious challenge. Camilla's position strengthened. Her children were accepted. Her extended family moved in comfortable proximity to the throne. But comfort, inside the British monarchy, has always been conditional. And by the time 2026 arrived, the conditions had changed entirely. The first tremor came not from within the family, but from the world outside it. In February of 2026, Prince Andrew's name returned to the headlines with devastating force. The details of his situation, already deeply damaging to the monarchy's reputation, reached a new level of public scrutiny that sent shockwaves through the institution. The question of who belonged near the crown, and who had been allowed to remain there for too long without justification, suddenly became urgent in a way it had not been before. Inside the palace, conversations that had perhaps been postponed or left deliberately vague could no longer be avoided. The monarchy was already navigating an extraordinarily delicate moment. King Charles had been dealing with a cancer diagnosis whose full severity had never been completely disclosed to the public. He was governing, fulfilling his duties, and maintaining his public presence, but those closest to him understood that the question of legacy had taken on a new and pressing weight. What kind of monarchy would he leave behind? What would it look like? Who would be part of it? And perhaps most critically, who would not? These were not abstract questions. They were live, urgent, and deeply personal. And into that moment stepped Princess Anne. Princess Anne has never been a woman who apologizes for her convictions. In a family where public image is managed with extraordinary care, where every word is weighed and every gesture calculated, and has always stood apart. She is direct where others are diplomatic. She is decisive where others are cautious. And she has spent decades making clear, through her actions rather than her words, exactly what she believes the monarchy should be and exactly what it should not. Her philosophy has never been difficult to read. It is written into the choices she made for her own children. When Peter Phillips was born in 1977, the son of Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips, a decision was made that stunned many royal observers at the time, and declined to have her son given a royal title. Peter would not be a prince. He would not carry the weight of royal designation into his life. He would make his own way, earn his own standing, and build his own identity without the institutional scaffolding of a title attached to his name. The same choice was made for her daughter, Zara. Born in 1981, she grew up without a princess title, went on to become an Olympic equestrian athlete, and built a reputation based entirely on her own merit and discipline. Zara Tindall is respected today not because of what she was given, but because of what she earned. This was not an accident. This was not oversight. This was in making a deliberate and deeply personal statement about what she believed royal status should mean. In her view, proximity to the crown is not a birthright to be inherited passively. It is a responsibility to be earned actively. And those who exist near the institution without earning that proximity, who benefit from access and association without offering genuine service in return, represent something Anne has never been willing to tolerate quietly. For years, she watched the Parker Bowles family settle into the comfortable edges of royal life. She watched Tom Parker Bowles move through the same social circles, attend the same events, and benefit from the same quiet courtesies that the palace extended to those connected to Camilla. She watched Laura Lopez occupy a similar space. She watched the extended family gradually accumulate the small but significant privileges of royal proximity, not because they had earned them through service or sacrifice, but simply because of who their mother had married. And in Anne's world, that was never going to be a permanent arrangement. But conviction alone does not move institutions. Institutions move when the right moment arrives, when the right pressures align, and when the right people are willing to act. By early 2026, every one of those conditions had been met. The pressure of Prince Andrew's situation had forced the palace into an uncomfortable and very public reckoning with the question of who deserved to remain in the orbit of the crown. The answer the institution was slowly, painfully arriving at was that the era of allowing individuals to enjoy royal proximity without justification had to end. The cost to the monarchy's credibility was simply too high. At the same time, Prince William was consolidating his position with a clarity and a confidence that made his intentions unmistakable. The Prince of Wales had spent years quietly but deliberately building a vision of a leaner, more focused, more merit-based monarchy, one that would strip away the unnecessary weight of extended family associations and concentrate the institution's identity around a smaller, more clearly defined core. William had watched his mother be pushed to the margins of the institution she had married into. He had watched the people around her be managed, diminished, and ultimately removed. He had grown up understanding, at the most personal level possible, what it meant when the palace decided that certain presences were no longer convenient. And now, as the future king, he was applying those hard lessons to his own vision of what the monarchy needed to become. He did not want a court filled with the extended relatives of the people his father had chosen to love. He wanted an institution defined by purpose, by public trust, and by a clear, defensible answer to the question of why each person connected to the crown was connected to it at all. The Parker Bowles' presence in the royal orbit did not have a defensible answer to that question, and William knew it. But there was a problem, a significant one. The person most directly positioned to act on the growing institutional unease about the Parker Bowles family's presence was King Charles. And Charles was the one person who could not act, not openly, not directly, not without fracturing his marriage in a way that would send very public shockwaves through an institution already struggling to maintain its stability. Camilla was his wife. Tom and Laura were her children. To move openly against them would be to move openly against her. And whatever private tensions existed within the marriage, Charles was not willing to be seen doing that. He could not afford it emotionally, and the palace could not afford it publicly. So Charles needed someone else. Someone with the authority, the credibility, and the personal conviction to act on his behalf without making his involvement visible. Someone whose own history and philosophy would make the decision look principled rather than political. Someone the institution would follow without demanding an explanation that pointed back to the king. He needed Princess Anne. Anne, by all indications, did not need to be asked twice. The mechanics of what happened next were characteristically quiet. There was no formal meeting that left a paper trail. No memorandum. No recorded decision. The British monarchy has always conducted its most consequential internal business in exactly this way, through conversations that happen in private rooms, between people who understand each other perfectly, where nothing needs to be written down because everything has already been understood. What is understood, from the pattern of what followed, is this. Princess Anne proposed the removal of 5 Parker Bowles family members from the informal but very real infrastructure of royal life. Not their titles, they had none to remove. Not their public roles, they held none that required formal stripping. What was removed was something more subtle and, in many ways, more significant. The access, the invitations, the quiet institutional courtesies, the soft, invisible architecture of belonging that had been extended to them, piece by piece, over the 2 decades since Charles and Camilla's wedding. It was the removal of the unspoken assumption that they were part of the world of the crown. And Charles approved it, quietly, privately, without telling Camilla. That last detail is the one that changes everything about this story. Because this was not simply a bureaucratic decision about institutional efficiency. This was not purely a philosophical statement about the nature of royal proximity and the importance of iron standing. Those elements were present, and they were real. But underneath them was something far more personal and far more painful. A husband had sanctioned action against his own wife's family. He had done it without her knowledge. He had used his sister as the instrument of that decision so that his own hands would remain visibly clean. And he had done all of this while Camilla continued to stand beside him at public engagements, smile at the cameras, and carry out the duties of a queen who had no reason to suspect that the ground beneath her family had already shifted. The silence around the decision was not an accident. It was architecture. It was designed to protect Charles from the direct consequences of a choice he had nonetheless made. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the palace, Princess Anne moved forward with the work that had been given to her, and the 5 names began to disappear. The disappearance of a name from royal life does not happen dramatically. There is no ceremony, no confrontation, no moment where someone is called into a room and told directly that their presence is no longer welcome. The British monarchy does not operate that way. It never has. The institution has always preferred the slow, deliberate withdrawal of warmth over the sharp, clean cut of direct confrontation. What happens instead is quieter, and in many ways, far more devastating. An invitation that arrived the previous year does not arrive this year. An access pass that was quietly renewed without question is quietly not renewed. A name that appeared on a guest list for a private palace function simply does not appear. The phone calls from certain courtiers become less frequent. The small gestures of institutional inclusion, the kind that most people outside royal circles would never even know existed, begin to fade, one by one, until the person on the receiving end of that fading understands, without being told, exactly what has happened. This is how the royal family manages its boundaries. This is how it has always managed them. And this is precisely how it managed them in the case of the Parker Bowles family in the early weeks of 2026. Tom Parker Bowles felt it first, according to those familiar with the situation. The channels of communication that had kept him connected to palace life, the informal relationships, the courtesies extended to him as the son of the queen consort, began to cool. Events he might have expected to attend were not events he was asked to attend. The comfortable assumption of belonging that had surrounded him for 20 years began, quietly but unmistakably, to dissolve. Laura Lopez experienced the same withdrawal. The invitations narrowed. The access thinned. The invisible infrastructure that had supported her connection to the institution her mother led began to retract, piece by piece, with no explanation offered and no confrontation initiated. And the three more distant Parker Bowles relatives, individuals who had never occupied prominent positions but had nonetheless benefited from the extended warmth of Camilla's royal position, found themselves equally, and equally silently, cut adrift. 5 names, 5 quiet withdrawals, and not a single public word about any of it. But silence, inside a family as closely watched as the British royal family, is never truly silent. Word travels. Observations accumulate. The people who manage the daily operations of palace life notice when patterns change. They notice when names disappear from lists they have appeared on for years. They notice when access that was routinely extended is routinely no longer extended. And they talk, carefully, privately, in the way that people who understand the stakes of their position always talk, among themselves. And gradually, the shape of what had happened began to emerge. The understanding that Princess Anne had been the instrument of the decision spread through certain circles with the quiet certainty of something that, once known, seemed almost inevitable. Of course it was Anne. Who else would Charles trust with something this sensitive? Who else had both the personal conviction and the institutional authority to carry it out without leaving fingerprints that pointed back to the king? Who else had spent an entire career demonstrating, through the choices she made for her own children, that she believed in exactly this kind of principled boundary drawing? The decision made complete sense when Anne's name was attached to it. It made sense philosophically. It made sense strategically. And it made sense personally, because Anne had never made a secret of her belief that the monarchy needed to be protected from the creeping expansion of royal adjacency, the slow accumulation of people who belonged near the crown not because they served it, but simply because they were close to someone who did. The Parker Bowles family, in Anne's assessment, represented exactly that. And now, with Charles's private blessing and William's institutional vision providing the broader context, she had acted on that assessment. The question that remained, the question that no one inside the palace was prepared to answer publicly, was what Camilla knew. And when she knew it, the timing, by all indications, was brutal. Camilla had spent 20 years building her position within the monarchy. She had endured public hostility that would have broken a less determined woman. She had navigated the extraordinary complexity of being the woman the public blamed for the end of Charles and Diana's marriage, of stepping into an institution that had never quite decided whether it wanted her, and of slowly, painstakingly earning a degree of acceptance and respect that had once seemed entirely out of reach. She had done all of that while carrying her family with her. Tom and Laura were not simply her children. They were her anchor, her continuity with the life she had lived before the crown became part of it. Their presence in the extended world of royal life was not, to Camilla, a political question. It was a personal one. It was the evidence that in gaining everything the monarchy represented, she had not been required to sacrifice everything that had come before it. And now, without warning, without consultation, and without the direct confrontation that would at least have given her the chance to respond, that evidence was being quietly erased. When the reality of what had happened reached Camilla, the response, according to those close to the situation, was not the kind of explosive fury that makes headlines. It was something quieter and, in its own way, more telling. It was a cold, contained, and deeply private rage. The kind of anger that does not express itself in confrontation because the person feeling it understands, with complete clarity, that confrontation would cost more than it could possibly gain. The kind of anger that is swallowed whole and held internally because the alternative, making it visible, making it public, demanding accountability in a way that would require the palace to respond, would only expose the full dimensions of her vulnerability. Camilla was furious. And Camilla said nothing. Because what could she say? To confront and directly would be to confirm that the removal had happened, and to do so in a way that would immediately become public, immediately become a story, and immediately position her as a woman at war with the most respected member of the royal family. Anne's public standing was immaculate. Her reputation for principled, no-nonsense decision-making was one of the most durable assets the monarchy possessed. A public confrontation with, and was not a confrontation Camilla could win. To confront Charles was worse. To go to her husband and demand an explanation for a decision he had privately approved, a decision he had deliberately kept from her, would be to force him into a position where he either admitted his betrayal or denied it. If he admitted it, the marriage absorbed a wound it might not recover from quietly. If he denied it, Camilla would be left with the knowledge that her husband had lied to her face about something that directly harmed her family. Neither outcome was survivable without cost. And so Camilla did what the monarchy has always trained its members, willingly or not, to do in moments of private crisis. She composed herself. She appeared at engagements. She smiled. She performed the role of a queen who was entirely in control of a world. And behind that performance, the quiet fury burned on. What made Camilla's position particularly isolating was the sudden, stark visibility of how narrow her support network had become. Charles, the person she should have been able to turn to, had compromised himself through his private approval of the decision. William, the future king whose institutional vision had helped create the conditions for the removal, had always maintained a careful and not entirely warm distance from his stepmother. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had her own sphere of influence and her own priorities, and those priorities did not include protecting the Parker Bowles family's place in royal life. The people outside the immediate family who might have offered Camilla comfort and solidarity were equally unavailable. Her sister, Annabel Elliot, who had long been one of her closest confidants, found her own access to the royal world narrowing in the same quiet way that had affected the Parker Bowles family. And Camilla's unlikely friendship with Sarah Ferguson, a connection that had surprised many royal observers but had clearly offered both women a sense of mutual understanding, was itself a liability in an institution that viewed Ferguson's presence with barely concealed wariness. Everywhere Camilla looked, the circle had tightened. The people who had surrounded her, supported her, and given her a sense of continuity with the life she had built were either compromised, distant, or quietly being removed from the equation. She had won the crown. And in winning it, she was discovering the precise dimensions of what she had lost. There is a particular kind of power that operates most effectively in silence. It does not announce itself. It does not issue warnings or deliver ultimatums in language that can be quoted or challenged. It moves through institutions the way water moves through stone, not by force, but by patience, by persistence, by the slow, steady application of pressure that leaves no single visible mark, but reshapes everything it touches over time. This is the kind of power Princess Anne has always understood. And this is the kind of power she exercised in the early weeks of 2026 with a precision that reflected decades of watching the monarchy operate at its most consequential level. But to fully understand what Anne's decision represented, and why it landed with the weight that it did, it is necessary to understand the broader landscape into which it fell. Because the removal of 5 Parker Bowles names from the informal infrastructure of royal life did not happen in isolation. It happened at the intersection of multiple forces that had been building inside the institution for years, and it happened at a moment when every one of those forces reached a kind of simultaneous peak. The first force was Charles himself. King Charles III had spent more than 7 decades waiting to be king. He had watched his mother reign with a steadiness and a longevity that had come to seem almost permanent. He had built his own public identity, pursued his own causes, survived his own very public failures, and arrived at the throne carrying more personal history, more complexity, more contradiction, more scrutiny than almost any monarch before him. And then, before he had fully settled into the role, the cancer diagnosis arrived. The details of Charles's condition had never been fully disclosed. The palace managed the information with characteristic care, releasing enough to acknowledge the reality without releasing enough to fuel speculation about timelines or severity. But those closest to Charles understood what the diagnosis meant in terms of how he was thinking about his reign. It meant urgency. It meant legacy. It meant that the questions he might otherwise have deferred, the questions about what the monarchy would look like after him, about who would be part of it and who would not, about the institutional shape he would leave behind for William to inherit, could no longer be deferred at all. Charles had always been a man who thought deeply about the future of the institution he served. But the cancer gave that thinking a sharpness it had not previously had. And one of the things that sharpness illuminated, with uncomfortable clarity, was the question of the Parker Bowles family's place in the world of the crown. He loved Camilla. That was not in question. The marriage was real, the commitment was genuine, and the decades of devotion that had preceded the wedding were not the kind of thing that disappears in the face of institutional pressure. But Charles also loved the monarchy. He had devoted his entire life to it. And in the quiet, private reckoning that a cancer diagnosis forces upon a person, he had arrived at a conclusion that was painful but, in his own assessment, necessary. The Parker Bowles family's presence in the orbit of the crown was creating a weight the institution did not need to carry. It was creating associations that complicated the monarchy's already complicated public image. It was providing ammunition to those who argued that the institution remained too insular, too self-serving, too comfortable in its habit of extending privilege to those who simply happened to be close to the right people. And with William watching, with the future of the institution resting on the foundation Charles would leave behind, something had to change. The second force was William's vision. And by 2026, that vision had developed a clarity and a confidence that made it impossible to ignore. Prince William had grown up inside the monarchy's most turbulent decades. He had lived through his parents' separation, through the public devastation of Diana's death, through the years of institutional rebuilding that followed. He had watched the palace make mistakes, seen the moments when the institution's instinct for self-protection had overridden its capacity for genuine human response, and he had formed his own conclusions about what kind of monarchy he intended to lead. Central to those conclusions was the principle of purpose. Every person connected to the crown, in William's vision, needed to have a clear, defensible reason for that connection. Every association, every access, every courtesy extended in the name of the institution needed to be justifiable in terms of the public service it represented. The era of royal adjacency, of people benefiting from proximity to the throne simply because of personal relationships rather than public contribution, was, in William's view, an era that needed to end. He had made this clear, in the careful, indirect language of a man who understands that words spoken by a future king carry institutional weight through a series of decisions and positions taken over the preceding years. The slimmed-down monarchy, the focus on a working royal core, the deliberate distance maintained between the official royal identity and the sprawling network of extended family associations that had historically clustered around it. The Parker Bowles family sat squarely in the category of associations William wanted gone. Not because of personal animosity, the situation was more institutional than personal, but because they represented exactly the kind of royal adjacency his vision of the monarchy had no room for. Tom Parker Bowles had no formal role. Laura Lopez had no public service function that justified her palace access. The three more distant relatives existed in the royal orbit for no reason that could be explained to the British public in terms of service, sacrifice, or contribution to the institution. They were there because Camilla was there. And while Camilla's position was unchallengeable, she was the queen, and the extension of royal warmth to her broader family network was a different matter entirely. William had not ordered the removal. That is an important distinction. He had not issued a directive or made a demand. He had done something more effective and more durable than that. He had made his vision so clear, so consistent, and so unmistakable that the people around him, including his father, including his aunt, understood precisely what he wanted without him ever needing to ask for it directly. In the language of the monarchy, that kind of understood intention is its own form of command. The third force was Princess Anne's own moment, and had watched the Parker Bowles integration into royal life for 20 years with the particular attention of someone who had strong views about what was happening but had not yet found the precise moment to act on them. She had maintained her own standards, the standards demonstrated by her choices for Peter and Zara, while watching those standards quietly ignored in the accommodation extended to Camilla's family. She had never been openly hostile to Camilla, and is too disciplined for open hostility, too aware of the damage it would cause the institution she serves above all else. But she had never been entirely comfortable with the trajectory either. And as 2026 arrived, as Charles's health concerns sharpened the question of legacy, as William's institutional vision became impossible to mistake, and as Prince Andrew's situation reignited the public conversation about royal accountability and recognized her moment. It was the convergence of everything she had believed for decades with a set of circumstances that made action not just possible, but necessary. She approached Charles. The conversation was private. It was almost certainly brief. Charles and Anne have always understood each other in the particular way that siblings do when they have spent their entire lives navigating the same extraordinary institution, the same impossible pressures, and the same fundamental question of what the monarchy owes to itself versus what it owes to the people who marry into it. Charles listened, and Charles agreed. He gave Anne what she needed, not a written order, not a formal directive, but the private, unambiguous signal that she had his support. That if she moved forward with what she was proposing, the king would not intervene. The king would not reverse it. The king would not, when the consequences arrived, stand between Anne's decision and the people it affected. That signal was enough. And so the work was done. Quietly, efficiently, and with the complete absence of drama that characterizes the monarchy's most consequential internal decisions. 5 names. Removed from access lists. Excluded from invitation rosters. Disconnected from the soft, invisible infrastructure of institutional belonging that had been built around them, piece by piece, over 2 decades. Tom Parker Bowles, Laura Lopez, 3 more distant relatives whose connection to the royal world had always been defined entirely by proximity rather than purpose. Gone. Without announcement. Without explanation. Without the confrontation that would have allowed those affected to respond, to argue, to appeal to the one person, Camilla, who might have been able to intervene. Because by the time Camilla understood what had happened, the decision was already complete. The palace had moved. The names had disappeared. And the king, her husband, had already given his private blessing to the woman who had carried it out. The question that now hung over everything, unanswered, unresolved, and deeply uncomfortable, was whether this was the end of the story or simply its beginning. Because institutions that move once tend to move again. Decisions that establish a precedent tend to be followed by decisions that extend it. And the logic that had removed 5 Parker Bowles names from the informal infrastructure of royal life was a logic that did not stop neatly at 5. Who else, by that same logic, did not belong? Who else had been allowed to accumulate royal proximity without the justification of genuine public service? Who else existed in the comfortable edges of the crown's world for reasons that William's merit-based vision of the monarchy could not defend? The answers to those questions had not yet been acted upon, but the questions themselves were alive inside the institution. They were being asked. They were being considered. And the people who found themselves in the uncomfortable position of not having clear answers, of belonging to the royal world through relationship rather than purpose, were watching what had happened to the Parker Bowles family with a very particular kind of attention. For Camilla, the story had already moved into its most painful chapter. She had built her position over 20 years of extraordinary effort and endurance. She had survived the public hostility, the institutional resistance, the weight of comparison to a woman the world had loved with an almost mythological intensity. She had stood beside Charles through everything, through the controversies, through the grief, through the long, difficult years of rehabilitation that had eventually delivered her to the position of Queen Consort. And now she was discovering that the position she had won did not come with the protection she had assumed it included. The crown was hers, but the world around it, the family she had brought with her, the network of relationships and associations that had given her a sense of continuity and belonging, was being quietly, systematically dismantled by the same institution she had spent 20 years fighting to be accepted by. She had won, and in winning, she was learning the precise, painful cost of what that victory had required her to surrender. The 5 names were gone. The silence around their disappearance was total. And somewhere in the private rooms of the palace, behind the composed expression of a queen who had learned long ago that survival required the complete mastery of her own visible emotions, Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla, sat with the full weight of what had happened. Alone with it, contained by it, and, for now, entirely without recourse. The monarchy had spoken, not in words, not in announcements, but in the oldest and most effective language the institution has ever used. In silence. In absence. In the quiet, devastating removal of 5 names that had once meant belonging and now meant something else entirely. The only question that remained was the one no one inside the palace was yet prepared to answer. Was this where it stopped? Or were there more names coming? If this story moved you, if the hidden dynamics of the royal family leave you with questions that demand answers, then like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And when you're ready, the next video is waiting. Because inside the walls of the British monarchy, the story is never truly over.